Good morning. Sitting on the porch. Wonderful porch God's provided. Just a great place to hang out. Felt God gave me something this morning, but I want to start by telling you something really cool. And some of you know this, and I made reference to it in an earlier video, but got to tell you a wonderful gift we've been given. Um, we've always wanted to go to the Grand Canyon. And that has to do with my mother's description. She was such a spiritual woman, and she said she felt the sense of God stronger at the Grand Canyon than anything in nature that she'd ever seen before. So that's always made me want to go. And we wanted to go last year, but we had vehicle troubles and weren't able to go. And I believe God was in all that. And I've shared that before. But I wanted to tell you that our sons, and we've got sons. Our sons went together and they are flying us to the Grand Canyon, and they let us do the specifics as far as deciding where we stay and all of that. But they put up the money, and we are staying in a much nicer places than we would have picked. And they have really blessed us. So I'll just leave it at that. They have blessed us tremendously, and our car is paid for to rent, and our stay, and uh, our trip, the flight. So we get to go to the Grand Canyon. So I'm excited about that, and maybe I'll make a video out there. We'll see. We'll see what happens. And I'd kicked around not even taking a phone, but um, I may want to do a video out there. We'll just see. We'll just see what happens. So really, really grateful for that. So we're going to be gone for a little bit, and God's got everything else taken care of on this end, including my guardian angel watching the property. So I want to share something really, really powerful that is so simple. And I'm going to tell you a simple story about my mother. But first, I want to show you this. My mom called this a meat cleaver, and I think that's the appropriate name. I found this after I'd had these thoughts about this video. I looked for it and found it. When I was a kid, we grew up poor. My dad was a traveling evangelist and just lived on donations that came in and never asked for anything. He didn't. And so we grew up poor, but God always took care of us and brought people into our lives like he has with Pam and I that would look after us when we had needs. And it was just cool to see growing up. I was taught faith at a young age, but meals would be pretty simple. Now, mom was big on a sit down evening meal, and the family would sit down and eat, but potatoes were very cheap in those days. And so it would be kind of built around potatoes and vegetables, and usually small portions if there was meat. And often it was liver. And the liver must have been cheap in those days, because I know a lot of people my age that said they grew up having liver and onions. But once in a great while, Daddy, if he was blessed with a little extra, would buy a inexpensive, not a high grade cut, but a round steak. And it was usually tough. And I was so intrigued as a kid. Mom said she never saw a kid ask so many questions. I'd drive you crazy. I was just interested in things, and I was intrigued by things. Well, when we'd get this round steak once in a while, Mom, she'd have a big smile and she'd say, Daddy got some steak, you know. And, we didn't know the difference. We thought it was ribeye probably. But anyway, this is so precious. She would put the round steak out on the counter, and it would be a great big round steak. And sometimes it was from our neighbor who raised beef too. But she would put the round steak out on the table, and she would beat the living daylights out of that with this. And I'm so glad I found this. I was intrigued by this. And she'd say to me, Tommy, for this to be tender and to be chewable and to be good and give us the nutrition, I've got to tenderize it. I'd say, well, you're hitting it so hard, and it looks like it's going to cut it all up. And it did have an edge on it, but it didn't cut clear in two, and she'd just pound away. on that, and she called it her meat cleaver. I don't know if that's the proper name or not, but that's what she called it. All right. So she would pound away on that, and then she would put some various spices on it, and sometimes then she would even go ahead and cut it up in strips, make it last longer, and put some noodles and things with it to make it stretch. But boy, that was a big deal. But I got so intrigued by watching her. Why did that story come to me? Because 2 or 3 videos back, I talked from Colossians chapter 3. And at the end of the video, as I recall, I read that scripture, and it kept coming back to me. And I want to call this brief message, Tender Has a Price Tag on it. That's what I want to call this message, because I'm going somewhere with this. And God reminded me of Mom's story. Tender has a price tag on it. For that cheap, inexpensive, tough piece of round steak to be presentable and edible by her family, because she loved her family. And she did her best to cook with what she had, and it was amazing how she could make things stretch and make it taste good, because we didn't have much money. There was time, if it hadn't been for our neighbor that was a farmer, we wouldn't have had groceries. But God took care of us. But for that to be tender, it had to be worked over with this. Wow. Stay with me. Colossians chapter 3, verse 12. Since God, I'm reading from the NLT, it's a very good translation of this particular passage, and I use different translations at different times. Since God has chose you to be holy people that he loves, since he's chosen you, and I always talk about that, I can't pass it. People get this idea, oh, some are chosen, others aren't. No, that's nonsense. That isn't the way it is. God waits to see who's going to step up. Because there's some difficulties, there's some pounding in our lives that bring us to tenderness. Are you listening? He waits to see who will say, okay, I don't like this, and I'm not looking forward to it, but I want the tender heart. Since God chose you, you stepped up. And many of you that watch these videos are people who are stepping up. I see it. I hear from you. You're wanting to be in the remnant. You're wanting to be chosen by God because you're telling him, I want to be chosen. That's the conditions. Since God chose you to be holy people he loves, you must clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. Ooh, patience has a price tag. Tender-hearted mercy has a price tag. These qualities that we want, so that God can powerfully work through us because they're his attributes. Are you with me? We become more God-like, Christ-like. And then he works through us. Tender-hearted mercy has a price tag. Some pounding for us to be tender. God, in his foreknowledge, in his wisdom, knows that we have to have the trials to produce the patience. There was an old song, Through It All, I've Learned to Trust in Jesus, that the Precious Kellum family sang for years, and we from time to time use the song. And it says, if I'd never had a problem, I wouldn't know that you could solve it. Yeah, good point. If I'd never had a problem, I wouldn't know you could solve it. How could I get up and sing Chain Breaker if I hadn't had some chains? How can I get up and preach on patience if I haven't been tested and pounded? Since God chose you, you must clothe yourself with tenderhearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. Make allowances for each other's faults. Oh, we don't do very good at that. Make allowances for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Oh, that pounding teaches us tenderness and teaches us to forgive. Sometimes we buckle under the pounding, but then it causes us to be forgiving when others buckle. You with me? You hear that? Sometimes we buckle under the pounding for a brief time. God doesn't let us fall, but we buckle under the pounding, but it makes us be patient with the other guy when he fumbles the ball. Remember, the Lord forgave you. You must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. And let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts. For as members of one body, you're called to live in peace and be thankful. All right. Tender, I have written down in the front of my notepad. Tender has a price tag on it. A number of years ago, I got a phone call in the year 2000. And it was a faint voice on the other end. And it was my mother saying, please come over, I need help, at her mobile home 8-9 miles away. There was a snowstorm going on right then. It was 3 days before Christmas, 2 days before Christmas, and there was a snowstorm going on. I got in the little Dodge Neon we had and headed over and couldn't get to the house. I actually got stuck on the road because of the snowdrifts. But I let the car set. Nobody else was going to come down the road either. Left the flashers on, as I recall, and I hurried through the snow to her mobile home. I went inside her mobile home to find that the woman who was very self-sufficient and very strong and often, through God, empowered all of us, was very faint and failing, we found out later, with congestive heart failure. And when I leaned down to her, I said, Mom, what can I do? And she said, get me to the bathroom. And so if I was standing in a church setting, I would probably try to act this out, but I got to stay within the scope of this video. So I stood up, helped her stand, and she was trembling, and had her face me. Her head come under my chin. She got shorter as she got older, actually. She'd say, I shrunk, and grin. I put her head under my chin, against my chest. I put both arms around her and put her feet on top of mine, and we walked backwards through the little living room, through the kitchen, and down the hall to the bathroom. I got her into the bathroom. She was a very modest and appropriate person, so I treated her accordingly. Went to the phone to call a friend, a dear friend, who had a new four-wheel drive truck, and I knew he would try to get to the house if he could. And his wife was a doctor. Love those people dearly and still do. Just a family that has been wonderful through the years in our ministry. Snowstorm continued. As I was on the phone, I won't go through all the details, but as I was on the phone, she aspirated. Yes, pardon me, vomited excessively. I didn't know that. I got off the phone, went back to the room, and she was choking and had nearly expired. I did all I knew to do. I don't like saying this, but the vomit was excessive, and it was a very, very ugly scene. She ended up dying. I lifted her body and put it in the recliner there in the bedroom next to the bathroom and sat down on the floor. They had to plow the road. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Call the county and plow the road in order for the undertaker to come out and for others to get there that I had called. So here we were, back to the room situation. I'm sitting on the floor. She has passed, and the scene wasn't very pretty. And I kept looking over her and saying out loud, I cannot believe that this just happened. I cannot believe that this just happened. And I looked up the wall and said, Lord, help us. I can't believe. I had envisioned my mother going in Elijah's chariot. She had been such a Christian and such a warrior in the kingdom. I had pictured her, probably the Lord will send a whole group of angels to pick her up. I never dreamed that she would die in this manner, excuse me. And as I sat there on the floor, God spoke to me powerfully, and there's some very private things he said to me. But one thing he said that I have shared is, he said, Tom, if I decided to take precious Virginia, my servant, who had been a missionary to Haiti and served me so faithfully, would anything you did or didn't do or didn't see in time affect that? She belongs to me. And I said, thank you, Lord, and began to cry. And I felt so, not just the grief of her death, but the heaviness of, I've always been a can-do guy, and I really believe that if you would ask Mom, if you're in trouble, who would you call? Call Tom. And she did call me that night. Not that I think I'm the hero of the family or anything like that, but I was close by, and I was a can-do guy, and I was aggressive and wasn't afraid to tackle things. And I believe she'd say, call Tom, he'll know what to do. Tom didn't get it done. Tom didn't get it done. The goodness of God shows up at the worst times. While sitting there on the floor and receiving the assurance that Virginia belonged to God and that nothing I did or didn't do or didn't see in time would affect it, while sitting there and accepting that assurance and thanking the Lord, God reminded me of something else. His goodness shows up every time. He said, this is why I allowed you to give her a 5-minute hug. And that just broke me as I remembered pulling her against me and putting my chin on top of her head, her feet on top of mine, and walking a baby step, literally at a time, backwards through the kitchen, through the little dining area, and down the hall to the bathroom. The Lord allowed me to give her a 5-minute hug. God is there. But sometimes there's pounding to get that tender heart you've asked for. I'm going to say that again. Sometimes there's pounding to get that tender heart that you ask for. I was at the altar years ago as a young man being mentored by Pastor Bishop. And I was praying, and he said, what can I pray for you? And I said, that God will deliver me from this trial. I'm just going through something really hard at work. And he got his finger under my chin. I was kneeling at the altar and lifted up so I'd look at him. And he said, aren't you the guy that last week asked me to pray with you that God would develop you? Okay. It takes some pounding to get a tender heart, a forgiving heart. And often those things that happen that we're like, oh my gosh, I never dreamed I would ever go through something like that. I thought Mom would go out in a chariot of fire. I thought 2 or 3 angels would show up and we'd all look up and see them there glowing and they would come to take Mom. I never dreamed she would strangle on her own vomit. But as I sat there on that floor and thanked him for the 5-minute hug, he said, what did Virginia teach you? And I thought her main lesson was faith. He said, well, are you going to do it or not? I know what I'm doing. Okay. And as I remember as a small child, Mom did teach us faith. She'd tell us Bible stories about David and Goliath, and she was so animated and so intense. And I was a little boy, mildly autistic, I think. I don't know if I was or not, but I sure had signs of it. And I'd get wrapped up in that story. I thought I was there. And she'd talk about David going down to kill, when he was about to kill Goliath and go down and get the 5 smooth stones. And man, I could just picture it. I could just picture it. I was there, and she'd tell us about Daniel and the lion's den and tell us stories. Oh, I just wondered, Mom, could you tell us a story? She's so entertaining. She was just incredibly entertaining. I mean, it was amazing. But he said to me on that floor after reminding me of the 5-minute hug, what did your mom teach you more than anything else? And I said, faith. When I wasn't old enough to talk, she was telling Miriam and I Bible stories that we hung on to when we had wayward kids, when we had leukemia, when we had the house fire, when we had the death in the bedroom where I was sitting. Tender has a price. Some of you are going through difficult things right now. I believe the remnant's being tested. We're being prepared for the tribulation hour. I believe the 7-year tribulation period is coming. And I believe, I believe that. And the return of Jesus, this society is going down and going down fast. And it is a disturbing thing to see. It's a disturbing thing. And many of you are going through trials, but God is preparing you. We got to have tender-hearted mercy and forgiveness and compassion as we move into a difficult future. And we got to reach anyone we can for Christ. And we've got to have the qualities of God to be able to do that. I often send people this picture that I have on my phone of a man raising his hand, and it says, I'm not picking on you. You're chosen. We can think, man, is God picking on me? Am I going through some kind of a trial here because is he mistreating me? Is he? No, it's because you're chosen. It's because you're chosen. You've stepped up. You're the guy that said to Reverend Bishop, I'll want this stuff. Well, then here comes a trial. So I got to close, but tender has a price tag. It does.